Greetings, listeners, and welcome to episode number 161 for the National Land Podcast. My name is Mac Christian, and I am the Chief Marketing Officer here at National Land Realty and the host for this podcast. I run the same intro every time. It's ingrained in my head. And today we're talking with Steve Chapman and David Dickens. Now, Dr. David Dickens is a professor at Georgia Southern. Oh, I have to say that because I know that David's going to listen to this. It is University of Georgia, but I do mess this up in the podcast. Steve Chapman was talking about his daughter going to Georgia Southern, and I totally confused them on the spot. Side note on this podcast, we do our research, we meet with our guests, and I do my best. This is something that I think I've spoken to this a lot. I do this on the side, and it's something that I just kind of, my content writer schedules guests and puts them on, and I do my best to get up to speed. I'm not in the field every day. I'm not a forester. I'm not a wildlife biologist. I am a marketer. So when I throw things together in my head, I go full send. I'm in the podcast. I'm doing the interviews. And sometimes I don't get it right. I'm going to say sometimes with my quotation marks there. But Dr. David Dickens was very gracious with my errors and my ignorance. And today, and Steve Chapman as well. Steve Chapman is a phenomenal guest. He's been on this several times before. He's a highly experienced forester and a volunteer, like I say in the podcast. Anything with feathers or fur, this guy tries to help out. He's a land specialist. And this is a really cool episode. We're talking about pine straw, and it's a topic that I'd never heard of, to be honest, but it did connect some dots in our political arena. I'm going to go into the political arena here real quick. During the first Trump administration, there was a conversation about California wildfires and raking of the forest. Now, after listening to this, after doing this podcast, I realized what that conversation was about. And it was because there was the criticism of, he thinks he can rake the forest, and the fact that he said you could rake the forest. It was two sides that don't do forestry trying to talk about forestry. And that is a mistake I try not to make. So there is, just to clarify for everybody before we jump into this, the raking of the forest is a thing, but the context is not. We're about to find out how forests get raked. And this is super cool. I found the entire topic absolutely fascinating. So please sit back and enjoy. And remember, subscribe to this podcast. Not because I'm the most amazing host in the world, but because we have really amazing guests and a lot of really cool information. And if you are even remotely interested in land, you will learn something from this podcast. So sit back, enjoy. Thank you. And I'm taking this live. We are live as of now. I'm here with David Dickens and Steve Chapman, and we're having a Georgia Southern alumni party right now is what we're having. Steve and David went to undergrad together at Georgia Southern. I just found that. I'm chalking it up like I knew that all along. So David Dickens is a professor of forest productivity at Georgia Southern. Steve Chapman has been on this podcast before. He is a realtor with National Land Realty, also a forester, also a member of Quails Forever, is it? Quail Initiatives and Wild Turkey Federation, and anything else that has to do with feathered or furry animals and in the outdoors, Steve is a part of. But today we're talking about alternative income sources for particularly timber properties. And this is one this was all new to me when we were going through the preliminaries on this. So I think this is a very good topic. David, give us a little bit about your background. Tell us how you got to Georgia Southern and where you are now.
All right. First of all, it's University of Georgia, and Steve and I did our undergrad together at University of Georgia. Well, Steve's daughter goes to Georgia Southern.
Oh my gosh! Okay, we were talking about multiple things.
That's okay. And I was housed at Georgia Southern.
His office was housed at Georgia Southern too.
Right. Correct.
You get to deduct 10 points from my score here.
Okay, a little bit of my background. I have a strong interest in forest soils, also southern pine silviculture, And pine straw has come in real handy as an alternative source of income to thousands of our forest landowners in Georgia and actually in Alabama, North Florida, South Carolina, and North Carolina in particular. And it's because it's so important and so valuable, I went ahead and got more expertise in this particular area that we'll talk about today.
Yeah, and Steve, if you want to give a little bit of background about your history with Georgia Southern.
Yeah.
Tell me about University of Georgia. Take me to today.
Yeah, I'm like David said, we were in undergrad together at the University of Georgia, the School of Forest Resources there. And then I worked with the Georgia Forestry Commission. I had a career with them. Then I've retired, worked for a bobwhite quail initiative as their national forestry coordinator. It covered 25 states. And then, as all happens with grant funding programs, that kind of petered out, and decided I could go back to consulting and finish my real estate license. And then I got on with National Land Realty in 2022, and so I'm doing that and some consulting and other various things like that.
And to go back on our previous conversation, you are now the proud parent of a Georgia Southern student.
Yes, go Eagles!
Congratulations, that is very cool. So we're talking about utilizing pine straw, basically is what we started talking about. And I'm going to take it from a 101 level. David, if you want to start us in, tell us what pine straw is for those that are not aware, and sort of what you're talking about, the program that you run.
Okay. Pine straw is nothing more than the fresh fallen needles from a pine tree. And in particular for us in Georgia, it's going to be longleaf is the primary species that's raked, has very long needles. Slash would be second, but it's not raked too often anymore. And slash has a very narrow native range, so we really don't see it in South Carolina or North Carolina. And loblolly is our third species, but that hasn't been raked in probably since the early 90s. So with that, a contractor would go meet a landowner that's got longleaf pine that's suitable to rake, and they would offer them a sum of money. It can be sold either by the acre or by the bale, but the straw is literally baled into bales, and bales can be rectangular, they can be cylindrical, long cylinders, and they're brought to like Ace Hardware, Walmart, Home Depot, Lowe's, and they're sold for mulch and landscaping. And it's used all over our state. And actually, one large contractor that does 10,000 acres a year of pine straw raking, his straw goes as far west as California for a celebrity that throws parties. They like to have fresh straw out, pine straw out on the ground, and all the way up into Canada. And so it goes far and wide. And it's somewhere between an $80 to $110 million funds paid to landowners annually. So it's good money, and it occurs prior to that first thinning, which usually occurs mid-teens, maybe to early 20s for longleaf pine. And you can start raking as early as age 12 or so for longleaf, and it becomes an annual income. And we can talk about those funds per acre per year whenever.
And kind of going back into the 101 level, when you're talking about,
Sure.
and this is for somebody who is interested in timber investment, there's a possibility here of alternative income. Is right. When he's talking about the age of the trees, you're planting in cycles. It's basically you're talking about a very, very slow crop, right? Like it's a crop you harvest at a certain age, and when those get to around 12 years old, you get the opportunity to do things like harvest the straw. What is the reason that it waits until 12 years of age? Is that because the quantity of straw that gets put down over that amount of time?
Really more, yeah, that's the main factor. Is there has to be sufficient straw on the ground for a contractor to see that it's profitable. And usually that is for longleaf as 12 to 15 years, depending upon spacing, survival, and site productivity. And they can rake, though, for about 10 years, which is great. So, 10 years or maybe even more. You're making anywhere from, on a cutover site, from 150 to 250 an acre a year, to on an old field site, which has high fertility and essentially no hardwoods to control. You're looking at more like $250 to $400 an acre a year. You do a 100-acre tract, and let's say you're right at 300 an acre, that's 30 grand a year, and that can be for up to 10 years. That's $300,000. And then you would do your thinning. So you're making $300,000 potentially before even your first cut of timber. So real good money.
Yeah. And this is, so for any landowner that looks at doing this, is it a government program to get into?
Yes.
Are you contracting private entities? Private. Yep. Is there a list of people that do this? I mean, how would one go about this?
Yes, there's a number of ways a landowner can find a contractor, and there's a number of ways, and I know of one in particular, how a contractor finds a landowner. And these contractors, these pine straw contractors, some are small, some are large. Some of the bigger ones will do 10,000 or more acres a year of raking, and that's a lot of straw. So the contractor can use, by them driving up and down roads, they might find a tract that, my gosh, nobody's raking this. It's suitable. It's longleaf pine. It's the species we want. It's clean understory, easy access in and out. They can go on to Q Public on the web and look up who that landowner is. Oftentimes there'll be contact information, and they will contact them. I've had that happen on our farm. We have slash pine, and I've had 2 calls, and they found out both of them on Q Public. So the landowner on the other end that is interested in getting contractors to come and offer or bid on their property, they can go to gatrees.org. That's the Georgia Forest Commission website, and they'll have a list of contractors for pine straw raking, and they would simply give them a call. And if they contact me, for example, I'm an educator, I'm not a contractor. I can give them some of the large, long-lasting contractors that are very reputable. You tend to give them 3 or 4 names and phone numbers, and then the landowner goes from there. And obviously, multiple bids are better than a single bid.
And Steve, tell me a little bit about your background with this. Have you worked with this? Oh, you're on mute. I timed it well.
Yeah, I've been involved with pine straw probably 25 years. Back in the 90s, the Conservation Reserve Program had a big longleaf planting program, and we planted hundreds of thousands of acres here in Georgia. And so that's where the real big pine straw market began, even though if they're under contract in CRP, they're not supposed to rake. So when they come out of their contract, they can rake then. And then, so I was a field forester at that time. And then I worked out of our state forestry office and started working kind of as the pine straw coordinator for the Forestry Commission, and kept up the list of pine straw contractors, worked with landowners, worked with folks like David on that kind of stuff. And then I've had some landowners that I've worked with that have raked straw over the years.
And the people that you've worked with, does this, as David said, become an alternative income source? Like they realize, like, okay, there's some money to be made.
Oh, most definitely, yeah.
And I want to go back to the age of the tree just to be really clear on this, because you said at 12 years old you can rake, and then you can go yearly afterwards. So at that 12-year point, it's the size of the individual tree and the ratio of needles that will fall, and I'll say needles because it becomes straw once it falls. It's the ratio of needles that size of tree drops. Is that on a yearly basis? Is that kind of what it goes around?
It's basically, we use the term canopy closure, where the tree's crowns are literally touching one another. And that's where there very little sunlight will get to the ground all of a sudden. You don't have that herbaceous weed growth. You don't have woodies growing. And ironically enough, at the same time, there is typically sufficient amounts of straw from that point on that a contractor can come in and rake annually and be very, very happy with what he or she is getting. So it's tree size, crown size, and the crowns touching one another when we get that first good straw on the ground and there's minimal growth. Now, the contractor oftentimes will have to use a herbicide probably once every 3 or 4 years, because when they start raking, there's going to be a seed bank in place. And that seed bank is all of a sudden going to say, okay, it's time to take off. There might be a little bit of sunlight here and there. You never get 100% canopy closure. You're lucky to get 80% canopy closure. So there is going to be a need for a herbicide treatment somewhere around year 3, 4, or 5 after the first rake. And oftentimes in the contract, the landowner can put the onus on the contractor to do the herbicide work. Now, they may want to have in the contract that they're not allowed to use certain herbicides that have soil activity, to just use herbicides that have foliar only activity. And that way there's not a problem with the trees that you're trying to keep healthy.
And you brought up the case of working with some people who are making up to $30,000 per raking. Is there, and this is always going to be an it depends question, but is there a rough figure that somebody could expect per acre on timber to rake?
Sure. On a cutover site, they're going to have to do some mowing, and they're going to have to do at least one herbicide treatment. Okay. The mowing does nothing more than maintain access down every single row. We've done that on our farm. We got a John Deere tractor with a 5-foot bush hog on the back. We also have a front end loader where we can mash stuff down, push it out of the way, etc. Every 3 years, they're going to have to do some mowing on a cutover site. Now, an old field site, there's not any woody vegetation in there, so that's a different story. So on a cutover site, your pine straw years are not going to be near as much as an old field site, which has high fertility because it's had a history of fertilization prior to it being planted in trees. So on a cutover site, I've seen 150 to 250 for longleaf, and it's species specific. An average of 200. We could use an average of 200, plus or minus $50. Depend if it's a real sorry deep sand, low straw yields, the trees aren't growing that good. That's going to be about 150. The high end, a good site is going to be 250. I've been offered 240. As the contractor said, if this was longleaf pine, I'd offer you 250 or 240 right now. So mine's cut over. Old field sites, great fertility, no hardwoods, good soil tilth through the history of disking. They're going to get somewhere around 250 to, I've heard as high as 425. So we would use that number probably around 300. That's why I use 300. And then you can go plus or minus another $100 either side of 300.
And Mac, a lot of times those old field sites have the reason why they're so fertile is because they were in ag production and they've been fertilized and limed and, so forth over the years. So a lot of times all you're going to have is some herbaceous weeds and grasses underneath them.
And there's no real need to mow in an old field site because there's no woodies. And that could be something as simple as one herbicide treatment just prior to the first rake. Your needle fall tends to occur somewhere around early to mid-September and ends somewhere around early to mid-December. That's what, fall is an appropriate name for, that's when needle fall occurs. So, A lot of contractors, most of the big contractors, they will literally rake year round. So it's a matter of when they get to your property. You would want to do that herbicide treatment probably mid-July. And that way it takes about 2 months for all the weeds to be controlled. That becomes mid-September, which right is the beginning of the needle fall. And again, we like to use foliar active herbicides, no soil activity. That way we won't hurt the trees if we over apply in a certain area.
Is there, when you're talking about removing something like pine straw from the forest floor, right. You mentioned, Steve, I think you mentioned that you cannot be part of a CRP program. And I was wondering if you could touch on that, Steve, from your perspective, on what the rationale is behind that, just to give a little bit of background.
Well, the programs that it's a Farm Services Agency program through the USDA. And the reason, well, there's a couple of reasons why, is because usually when there's a landowner under a CRP contract, they're getting an annual rental payment. And that there's a wide range of rental payments. It's based on soil production. The higher the soil production, the higher their rental rate, and it varies all over the state of Georgia, all over the Southeast. So they're getting an annual rental payment, so they're not supposed to make an income outside of that annual rental payment. And then also some of those longleaf cost share programs were supposed to be a wildlife habitat program. So it's just Farm Services Agency, just their rules limited the landowners from being able to rake pine straw if they're under contract for one of those programs.
Gotcha. And is there any negative possibilities of removing the pine straw? Does that take any nutrients out of the soil? Does that, you brought up, as soon as you take the pine straw out, then you get sunlight through to the forest floor. And if there's a seed bank there, it's party time, right? So what are some of the positives and negatives of raking?
Sure. The positive, obviously, is the landowner gets annual income.
That's a good positive. We can stop there.
The negatives are that when you rake straw annually, and some will even try to rake every half year. So that's when things can really get out of hand as far as your evaporative losses basically over double. Okay. So you're losing critical soil moisture, especially during the growing season when the trees really want to, when they're growing. The other part of the other negative is actual, and you alluded to this, when you're raking the litter layer off, that top layer of fresh needles that can be easily baled and sold, you are removing nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, even micronutrients. And the more marginal the site, the more marginal the soil, like a deep sand on top of a hill where it's 80 inches to just continuous sand, the more these removals of nutrients and these evaporative losses increases, will cause a lot of stress on the trees. And we've seen our cases of Ips beetles, black turpentine beetles, beetle activity. The trees get stressed out, and then all of a sudden you have excessive mortality. So the more marginal the site, and again, it goes back to soils, the quicker a potential problem could occur with excessive mortality. Now, old field sites and sites that are both old field with high fertility and also somewhat poorly drained soils to moderately well-drained soils, they will be the least impacted, but we've still seen Ips and black turpentine beetles get into those stands as well.
And when we're talking in certain things that I wanted to ask are kind of state specific, and I know that you're in Georgia, but I was thinking about, you were talking about evaporation, right? And I had to look into, after you and I talked the first time, I was just fascinated, and I ended up Googling for probably more time than I want to admit. But I live in a dry climate out west. Is it something where, like, if you are in a dry climate, you don't want to do this, you could damage your trees?
Yeah, I would say, for example, Oklahoma and East Texas, where we do still grow um, loblolly pine, and East Texas, I've seen, well, I've heard, I haven't seen longleaf pine out there as well. Now, how much of it, I don't know, but they get about 25 inches of rainfall. We get 48 in Georgia. So yes, the less rain you get, the more arid the climate, uh, the quicker this is going to negatively impact that stand. Yes.
Is
Good
it something
question.
where you would want to? I mean, when you're talking hundreds and hundreds of acres, it's not like you're going to set out like a center pivot and water your trees. You know, like that. It's not something you can really compensate for at that point. So you do want to be judicious on how you apply this in your area, given your annual rainfall. Like that's something to definitely consider if this is something that sounds appealing to you.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So, and as you're doing this, and I'm not going to pretend to know anything about tree farms. Okay. I'm just going to go at this big question. When you're talking about running a power rake through the forest, what's your typical spacing on trees when and say from start to first thin?
Right. You start out typically with anymore. We like to set our trees out in 12-foot wide rows. Okay. Every 12 feet, there's another row of trees. Now, 20, 30 years ago, 10-foot rows were the norm, but we've widened them to 12. I will say this, that if you want pine straw on a real marginal site and you've got longleaf pine, you may want to go back to the 10-foot rows because you're going to get that canopy closure a year or two sooner than if you had a 12-foot row. Okay. That's something not too many people think about, but I've been to enough places where, my gosh, here they are with 12-foot rows and they're missing canopy closure by 2 feet. And so, 10-foot will do two things. It'll get you into canopy closure on a marginal site, whereas 12-foot rows often will not. And two, it will get you on let's say a moderate to a good site. It'll get you into canopy closure about 1 to 2 years sooner than a 12-foot row. And then what you can do to compensate for trees per acre, rather than 6 feet in the drill or down the row, you might go to 7 to 7.5 feet. And you got the same amount of trees per acre. 6 by 12 is 605 trees per acre, and 7 by 10 is 622 trees per acre. So you're really, really close between the two of them, but you're giving that tree a little bit more room in the drill for its canopy to grow in the drill. So,
and if you got 12-foot rows, 10-foot rows, or what's your spacing per tree? And I'm just
it's historically been 6 feet, but with these mill closures, we've got some big mill closures going on right now in Georgia. They've just happened, and we're going to go with a lot lower planting density for lob. We may do something real similar for slash, but for longleaf, we're going to keep those relatively around 550 to 725 trees per acre because of poor survival and no genetic improvement. So in the drill, 6 feet, I wouldn't go any closer than 6 feet. And if I went with the 10-foot between the rows, I would probably go with 7.5 feet. Just tell the planting crew, if you can get them in 7 to 7.5, I'm happy. So that's around 600 trees per acre. But because of the mill closures, if they're planting loblolly pine, which has no pine straw value, it's just wood value, then we're looking at something like a 8 by 12 or a 9 by 12, because we want to skip pulpwood and get as many trees into chip and salt timber. But that's another story. Sorry.
Well, and Steve, I wanted to throw you in here too, because you've managed a lot of timber. Walk me through sort of the cycle of when are you choosing to thin and how do you do so to sort of maximize your output?
Well, I guess it depends on the species. Longleaf, it's going to take a longer rotation to thin, probably 18 to 20 years. Loblolly and slash, probably 12 to 14 for a first thinning. And you're looking at diameter size and typically you want it to be 5.5 inches, which would be a 6-inch tree in diameter, and then up. And we also look at the amount of crown ratio. If it starts to get below 30%, am I right, David?
I'd go with 33%, and the newer research is actually saying if you can keep it at 40%, it will respond that much quicker.
Okay. So, and then, but once you get your crown ratio below a certain density, 30 to 40%, you'll start looking at thinning so you can get a better response and get more needles on the trees so they can photosynthesize and grow. And then, so you'll grow them out to that age. And whenever they're doing thinning, and it depends on location and other things like that. Typically, we're row thinning every 4th to 5th row, and then thinning in between those rows, taking out the worst trees, which could be disease, fork, have a severe curve to them or anything like that. And then, once that thinning's done, you let them grow another 5 or 6 years. But like David said, we're looking at mass pollinated trees to where they grow faster and you're not having to worry about that pulpwood thinning. And David can talk a lot more about that. They've been doing some research on that. And then typically you get 1 or 2 thinnings out and then grow them out. If you're looking at it strictly from a financial standpoint, you're probably talking about clear cutting at 30 years old.
Clear cuts at 30. So, and to your point, David, is you can start doing this raking at 12 years, potentially up to 30 years.
Well, there is a caveat in there.
All right. There we go.
In Georgia, there are so many acres of unthinned longleaf stands that these contractors, as much as they drive up and down roads, once a stand is thin in Georgia, and that's the kicker, is in Georgia, they will find unthinned stands that they can rake for 5 or 10 years. So, once that stand is thin, again, that sunlight gets to the ground, all sorts of vegetation starts growing. There's not as much straw on the ground. Now, South Carolina and North Carolina, and this is the difference, they don't have near the number of thousands and thousands of acres of longleaf pine, and they rake longleaf pine like we do. That's the favorite species. They will go back in and do whatever's necessary between mowing and herbicides and maybe prescribed fire, and they can get those thin stands back into straw. But in Georgia, I've yet to see a longleaf stand that's been thin having the contractor come back in and rake it. Now, maybe there's a future to that. I don't know. So the raking window is canopy closure, and it could be as early as age 12 for longleaf pine. It might be as late as 15 if it's a slower growing, but it's that much later for the slower growing that first thinning is going to occur. So typically raking can occur for about a 5 to a 10 plus year period. Okay. And then once it's thin, you're off to growing timber, and you want chip and saw timber and maybe some poles out of that stand in Georgia.
And I would think as those older stands that we've got where most of the acreage was planted, as those start going out, they may start raking those kinds of stands just because there's not the availability of the younger stands.
And on average, so if I was looking at this as an investor, on average right now, let's say in Georgia, what is the typical total yield per acre for longleaf? Is that even something that can be quantified? Because when you're talking about a 30-year investment, obviously things change. So it would have to be as of right now, I guess.
Are you talking timber or are you talking, okay. And are you talking tons per acre or are you talking cash flow?
Per acre.
Okay, tons per acre or dollars per acre?
per acre.
Okay.
Talking
That is a
pure cash.
$64 million question, isn't it, Steve?
$64 million per acre. You heard it here.
No, $60 million question.
Dang it.
64 million.
Man, you had me really hyped up there. I was going to throw all my money in the timber.
We're running some numbers right now, and pulpwood prices have gotten so bad right now, and we don't know what that recovery time or what that dollar amount's going to be X number of years from now when things sort of come to equilibrium, so to speak. But pre-mill closures, your average thinning, and Steve, you're probably better at this than I am because you sell timber. What do you think? $200 or $300 to $500 max for your first thinning, maybe?
Yeah.
2 to 5. Okay. Second thinning, hopefully you have some chip and soil in there, maybe 7 to 8. Maybe. And again, Steve, chime in, please. And then final cut. And again, a lot of this is, old field versus cut over, good soil versus not so good soil. If a landowner has done well and he's got, let's say, average soils for Georgia, cut over, they might expect maybe 1,500.
Yep, 12 to 1,500 an acre.
Yeah.
And Mac, like David was trying to say, here in Georgia, take Southeast Georgia, for example. First off, we got hit by Helene last year and put hundreds of thousands of acres on the ground of good timber. So our prices dropped. We started getting $12 a ton in those areas for salt timber. And that's what, before Helene, that's what pulpwood was bringing. So pulpwood went down to $2-3 a ton in Southeast Georgia, and then started coming back. And then we had 2 mill closure announcements in Southeast Georgia down on the coast. And so now you're probably looking at $2 to $3 a ton for pulpwood. So that has changed the dynamics greatly.
Well, and my reason for asking was not to put y'all on the spot for quoting timber to everybody to make their timber investment. But what I wanted to do was run some quick fuzzy math while you did that and kind of talk about the overall yield per acre that someone could be looking at timber if they chose to rake versus chose not to. And you're talking about a total investment return of about $2,700 an acre per the lifespan of the tract, right? You've got first, second thinning, and then the final cutover. And then if you add in something like pine straw raking, you go from $2,700 an acre over a 30-year period to around $4,200 an acre over the same time span. If you chose to do, say, 5 rakings, like you've drastically increased the amount of return that you can gain out of a timber tract by just doing this simple thing. Which to me is pretty striking. Like this is a pretty good, it's a good investment.
It is. And if you think about it, you're also getting it annually and you're getting it before your first timber income. So it's a triple plus. I mean, on a cutover site, averaging $200 an acre a year. And let's say 5 to 7 years of that before your first thinning, that's money that landowner never had before. And all they're doing is giving the contractor the right to go out and rake, hopefully just once a year.
And just in case the question is in anybody's head, because I feel like it might be, when you're talking about raking, you're not talking about walking around with a stick, right?
That's correct. We're not doing the raking. It's the contractor and his or crew. Now, I will say this. There's 3 major types of raking. Pitchfork is actually fluffing, but you're not going to get near as much straw, and it's labor intensive, and that happens very infrequently. Okay. Then there's yard raking, and then hand baling. Okay. So that's labor intensive. And what we're seeing is a major trend towards the third option is mechanical raking and mechanical baling. And you go from a crew of maybe 10 or 12 to 3 or 4. And you can count on those 3 or 4 versus those 10 or 12 that you're relying on to show up every day. They don't show up every day. So this trend from going to hand raking and pitchfork raking, fluffing, to mechanical is moving heavily towards mechanical.
I was sort of joking about the hand raking thing, but that's really a thing. They bring crews out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Thing.
It's less and less frequent, though.
I can imagine, because I would never do that.
Right. Yeah, try to do that for 8 hours a day. That's no fun. That would be no fun.
My soft hands would fall to pieces.
Right.
And when they hand rake like that, there's actually the baler is basically a box that you stuff with straw, and you've got a hand thing that you pack it with.
It's just a trash compactor.
Yeah, basically.
That sounds terrible.
And a lot of work.
And that probably gives you lower density per bale, I'm guessing?
It does. Yes, that's correct. Yep.
And does that give you less cost per? And then, okay, let's go back into this. You brought up something when we talked initially about pricing, sort of things to watch out for when you are looking at getting somebody contracted to do your straw raking. And walk me through this part, because I found this super interesting.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. There's two main ways for a landowner to sell his or her pine straw to a contractor. There's by the acre, which is straightforward, and it's the same amount of money every year. And it's probably the same time of year every year as well. Selling by the bale is another option. The problem with by the bale is a bale has to be well defined in the contract. We had a landowner with 1,000 acres of slash. He was a big heart doctor, and he was getting about 200 rectangular bales of straw at 50 cents a bale. This is 20-something years ago when slash was raked a lot. As a matter of fact, that was the previous CRP program, 86 to 92, where they planted mostly loblolly and slash. But back to his story, somebody came in, he was getting 50 cents a bale, 200 bales times 1,000 acres. You do the math, boom, here's what he gets per year. Somebody offered him 65 cents a bale. His current bale at 50 cents a bale was a 13 by 13 by about 26 long. The 65 cents a bale, and he did not know this, and it wasn't in the contract, was the big cylindrical bale, which was equal to 2.5 of his rectangular bales. So he was making like 22 cents of his bale equivalent. And because he signed a contract, I didn't feel comfortable asking him how that all shook out. But if you do sell by the bale, a bale has to be defined in the contract, what those dimensions are. And then the other thing with selling by the bale, we have a study where we looked at bale counts every year for 10 years, and it's extremely variable bale yields from year to year. A lot of it has to do with rainfall. And, needles tend to stay on a tree for 18 to 24 months. So you can almost tell when somebody's going to have a really good rake is if you had good rainfall 18 to 24 months ago for that period of time. So your income is going to be variable. So we recommend to everybody to get the best per acre price and just stick with it and don't look back, because you're going to get the same amount of money every year. You don't have to worry about bale counts every year, and you don't have to worry about defining what a bale dimensions are in a contract.
I was going to say
the other way to sell, but not recommended.
Steve, were you going to jump in there? So it sounds like it's sort of like risk volleyball at that point. You've got your contractor is likely going to want to price you per bale, because that puts the advantage in their court. Because if there's a declined year, then you're not obligated to a certain payment. The landowner wants a static price per acre because of the same reason. They could have a down year and not be guaranteed income. So you have this jockeying of guarantees that you have to do up front.
I'm seeing almost all, especially if somebody has a really good tract of longleaf pine, clean stand, easy access in and out, especially an old field site, they're going to get what they want by the acre. It's going to be that real marginal stand, maybe a slash pine stand where they might want to try to do a per bale. And that's when that landowner has to try to switch gears and say, hey, I'd rather have a per acre price. Let's be on the same page. Because the third problem with by the bale is he or she telling you an accurate bale count every year? You don't know. You just you're trusting them to give you an accurate bale count. So there's 3 reasons to not do it by the bale.
I was going to say, unless you are out there watching them rake and see how many bales they stack, you're not going to know what's getting pulled out. And then what did you say on average? I really don't. I feel bad about these questions because I'm going to ask them anyways, but I realize how variable it is. But like on standard, what you said that the 13 by 20.
13 by 13 ends, a square end, and then a rectangular bale, maybe 26 inches long, a little bit over 2 feet.
Okay. I thought it's 20. It's so 26 and 13 by 13. How many of those can you pull out of an acre?
Okay, on a cutover site, let's say with an average soil, okay, probably, Steve, 125 to 200 max, maybe, bales per acre of the rectangulars. Now, an old field site, I've been told by 2 landowners and these guys, pretty honest Abes, 400 to 600 bales per acre in the first rake.
Almost
age 15. Yeah.
Just because
almost triple. Yeah, 2 to 3 fold. You go 150 to 200, all of a sudden you're at 400 to 600. And that's the first rake, because if the contract is age 15 for Longleaf, there's extra straw on the ground that has not decomposed. And I've walked over some of those stands just before their first rake at age 15, and there's a tremendous amount of straw in there. After the first rake, though, they're not going to be getting quite that yield. It's gonna drop. So we've seen a couple people actually do a hybrid where the very first year, because the landowner happens to be county agents that I've known for decades, they go, all right, I want this in year 1, and then in year 2 through 5, I get this, like a 450 for year 1, and then 375 in years 2 through 5, and they get it.
And in this case too, this wouldn't be something where, and I was thinking of like prescribed burning in these areas. This is that's something that you want to avoid probably. Do you manage? Okay, let's go back to this. Do you manage timber tracts with prescribed burn the same way that you manage rec land or something like that with prescribed burn?
Once you're out of pine straw, yes. And even pre-pine straw, you can do it, but you want to have your last burn 2 to 3 years prior to your first rake, because you want to have a lot of straw on the ground because you're burning up money otherwise.
That's exactly why I wanted to ask, because I was like, okay, if you're managing understory, are you going to manage that? So prior to that 12-year raking, how are you going to want to manage understory as it grows? Because you're not going to have that canopy cover to prevent it as much. You're going to have a lot in there. What do you want to use to manage that in the meantime?
Mowing every 3 years is ideal. Okay, on a cutover site. Now, old field site's a totally different story because there's no woodies to control, and you're not controlling them with mowing. You're just keeping access to be able to spray. Okay, you're cutting like sweet gum, oaks, and maples down to a half a foot above the ground. They resprout, and then boom, just before your first rake, you go in and spray. Maybe even a year before, and you control everything by using a herbicide. So prescribed fire is used, but it's not used frequently. And if you do use it, you'd want to do it about 2 to 3 years prior to your first rake, preferably 3 years prior to your first rake.
Yep. And prescribed fire can, if you do it early enough in the rotation, especially longleaf, you can help control those woodies and volunteer loblolly pines that may seed in. And also going back to the Conservation Reserve Program contracts, because a lot of those were wildlife, they were required to have some prescribed burning early and during the life of their contract.
And what's the average length on those CRP contracts?
10 to 15 years.
10 to 15?
Yep.
So is there potential within all this to run CRP, let it run out, do your raking, and then go back onto a CRP?
Once it's been in trees, I don't believe you can. It's got to be an old field site, former ag field.
Now they will let you renew a lot of times. You can put in and to renew your CRP contract, but you're still limited on the raking of the pine straw.
I got you. Because I was curious, it's like, okay, so can you let them run the CRP, do that for the first 10 years, let that run out, then do like 5 years of raking, and then go back on the CRP when you're done raking? No.
Nah. Mm-mm.
You got me looking for loopholes. I'm all in.
But if they are in CRP, David, what are some of the annual rental rates you hear on CRP?
The ones I've been hearing, and this is probably a decade ago, about 55 an acre a year. Does that sound about right? 55?
Yeah, the best, some of the best, 50 to 60, the better sites.
Right.
So
right.
for 10 years, you're getting a rental payment that way too. Not as much as the longleaf planting, but it is helping to offset your land taxes that you're having to pay to the county governments and so forth. So, I mean, some of those can be pretty good benefits if you get in the program.
Yeah, and just to kind of go through this too, let's talk about the uses of this straw. Like, what is this straw getting used for?
The major use of it is for landscaping and mulch around your azaleas, your rhododendrons, your shrubs around your house. Apartment complexes are big. A lot of contractors that take care of apartment complexes and quadruplexes and all that, they'll buy straw every year and they'll put it around those apartment complexes, and it's used on golf courses a lot. Golf courses will buy pine straw to beautify their golf course. It's basically the main use that I see, at least, is for landscaping.
Flower bed mulching.
Flower bed mulch, and Steve, you could probably speak to this too. But David, I asked you this the first time we talked too. Old tale I'd always heard is not to mess around a whole lot with pine because it will turn your soil, drop your pH, right? Like it messes with the pH in the soil. But you had a different take that it takes quite a bit to do that. I was wondering if you could tell me about that.
Yeah. Your soil pH will be reduced with a long-term use of pine straw, but it might be 0.2 of a unit over a decade. It is very, very slow. And because, when you're talking about a furrow acre slice of soil, which is 2 million pounds approximately, and you're putting maybe, oh gosh, I'd hate to even guess, probably 500 or 600 pounds per acre of pine straw. That's not much compared to 2 million pounds, 6.5 inches below it. So yeah, it's going to be very slow to do, and it could be easily rectified with a little bit of lime if it ever gets too low. And a side note to this, and you and I talked about this when we first met, is a lot of people would want to use wood chips or pine bark around their house. And that's in the southeastern U.S., we have to worry about termites. So pine straw will not attract termites. Neither the other good option for landscaping, not so much for a mulch, is the white rock, the little white pebbles. And again, that's not going to be a termite attractant, but we try to make sure that people do not go out and buy wood chips or bark pieces and put around their house, because that's going to be nothing more in the southeastern U.S. to be a termite attractant. And that's where pine straw, again, wins out over other types of mulch.
I'm like transfixed by different weird little things here. Like you're talking about white rock in the garden bed. And like, no, we don't have that. Everything natural in our area is basalt. So it's all black rock.
Well, there you go. Okay. It's
all completely different. Like then I got to think through my head. I'm like, oh, the garden beds look different in Georgia.
Yep.
Okay. So if somebody's doing this, and you mentioned that there is a risk of reducing nutrients in the soil, what's the corrective measure for that?
Well, fertilizer prices are out of the ceiling. They are not super high. So, and again, this gets sort of into the weeds, so to speak. But just because I'm pulling 20 pounds of nitrogen off per year, right, in pine straw off of a typical longleaf stand, only 10% of that becomes plant available. So you go from 10 or 15, what did I use? Did I use 15 pounds of?
Yeah. Yes.
All right. So if we use 15, I'm only really losing 1.5 pounds of available land, because all that nitrogen in the needles of a longleaf pine are in a long chain organic form. and they're not plant available until they get to either ammonium N or nitrate N, two plant available forms. And it's a very low and slow process for nitrogen. In contrast, potassium, K, it's very quick release. And you can have a lot of K be decomposing and actually become K2O, the plant available form of potassium in the soil, within 12 to 24 months. So it depends upon the nutrient. And again, that's where a simple soil test can tell, for us at UGA, it's somewhere around $6, $7, or $8 a sample. And if somebody's got flower beds and they're concerned about their nutrient status, they can take a sample down to 6 inches and send it off through the county extension office and get a full report based on what they're trying to grow and with recommendations. So it's easily rectified.
Gotcha. And so you're saying chances are you're not going to reduce the nutrients in the soil enough to really be detrimental?
Not in the near term. I'd say with let's say an 8 to 10 year rake, no, it's not going to be detrimental.
Gotcha. But if you go much longer, then
and especially on an old field site that has high fertility anyway, cutover site's going to be, something that you want to look at. And again, looking at those crowns, it gives you the best indication of how healthy that stand is.
I got you. So these are the biggest thing to this. I mean, that rings true with anything that has to do with land is you don't want to do it on a whim. You got to go through and make sure that you know exactly what you're doing with your trees. Get somebody like yourselves out there on site to tell them what to do is where I would sort of land with that on looking at doing that. As far as longleaf timber, how big of an industry is this in Georgia? Is it like, is this something that it's fairly common? I mean, I just don't know.
It's big. We typically, landowners on an annual basis will get somewhere around $500 to $800 million a year of income from timber. And pine straw is somewhere around 80 to 110 million a year. And the industry itself is somewhere, now this is the big hurt with these mill closures. It's been estimated at about $22 to $28 billion industry. So it's a very big industry in the state. I mean, land mass wise, Georgia's the biggest state east of the Mississippi, and 2/3 of the state, 36 million acres of land is in Georgia, and 24 of the 36 is in timber, is in trees, forest land. So 2/3 of the state's covered in forest land.
Is that managed forest land or just forest?
Well, I just did a talk on this morning, so that's a good question.
All right.
There's around 7 million acres of pine plantations in Georgia, and the rest of it is mixed pine oak, hardwood bottoms, and mixed hardwood stands. So it's actually pretty equal amongst, if I could show you a pie chart, it's very close to the same from different stand types in the state. So we're very balanced, thank goodness. Yeah. It's just not all pine plantations.
And the last question I had around, the longleaf pine stuff is the balers. Are the baling systems that they use? You mentioned the hands, your trash compactor baler. Are they using like a specialty baler, or is this like a typical, like, are you running this like a swath of straw and, what is the setup for this?
Okay, the hand baler is actually a wooden baler made out of plywood and 2x4s. And it's basically a rectangle. Okay, it's tall and with, let's say, a 14x14 opening at the top, and has plywood all the way down to the bottom and a little chute. And they'll put batches in at a time, and there's twine that they have that they can end up creating a bale out of that once they mash it down. But again, with this movement to mechanical, they're doing pull behind star balers that turn it into a cylinder, and they can set it from, I think, 18 pounds all the way to 36 pounds. And I think the average is like 27 pounds. And they use the old Christmas tree plastic webbing. You know how you make a Christmas tree get really small to put it on top of your car or back of your truck, whatever.
Yeah.
They use the same kind of plastic webbing to make a cylindrical bale.
Okay. Yeah. Cause I mean, I've only bales I've ever seen are, alfalfa and straw and stuff like that. So I'm picturing like running a swath through there. Like, how's this go? What are you using? So it is, it's like a plastic wrap that kind of keeps it together. Cause obviously pine straw is not nearly as long as other things that you see baled. So it's the ability to hold together. Like the logistics are all going through my head.
And that would be the mechanical raking and baling.
Yes.
The hand baling would be totally different. Totally different.
How long does it take somebody to do this? Like somebody goes in and rakes your acreage and okay. Also dumb question because it's dependent. But like let's say like, I don't know, it's probably weird to say per acre, but I don't know what the typical time period is for like, is it a weeks long project to get this done? Is it days? Is it?
Well, we have 36 acres of slash that were raked for 3 years before they moved on to Longleaf. And with their crew of about, I think I saw 6 to 8, it would take them about 2 to 2.5 weeks to do 36 acres.
Okay, there we go. Like that's perfect.
And that's hand raking and hand baling.
Yeah, that's not using the mechanical baler.
No, they would be through that in probably less than a week.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously the mechanical.
They really move. They really
Mac,
go.
For your information, as far as longleaf in the longleaf range and its habitat, it's estimated at one time that there was how many acres, Dave?
90 million.
90 million acres across the southeast, which stretch from Virginia all the way to East Texas. And now that it's, a small percentage of that. And, CRP there's been a big push to increase not only the acres of longleaf, but the management of that's already there too, which that's a whole nother podcast.
Awesome. I just noticed the time. Whenever we have timber on here, we always go like the recording always goes long. It's always interesting. I don't know what it is, but I was just watching the time. David, I want to be respectful of yours, but in the conversation, were there any questions I didn't ask that I should have? Are we missing anything?
Can't think of any.
I think we covered a pretty good bit.
we did. We went a lot deeper down the rabbit hole than I thought we were going to, so that's good. Yeah. But like I said, David, I want to be respectful of your time. And Steve, you as well. But thank you both. This is a super interesting topic and obviously extremely lucrative topic for those that go into it. I mean, it's a big deal. So thank you both very, very, very much. And I'll have links to everything that you need to get to and stuff in the show notes.
Yeah. And
great.
I definitely would, a blog on this would be great. And I think, could even include some graphs and other material, pictures, things like that. If there's anything that we need, I can go out and get pictures of bales. David he's probably got some already that he can pull up and send too. So that's something that we need to work with Bryce on, I guess.
Yeah, I'll put Bryce to work on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you both.
All right. Appreciate it.
Take care.
This concludes episode number 161 for the National Land Podcast with Steve Chapman, land agent out of Georgia and licensed in South Carolina, as well as Dr. David Dickens of University of Georgia. You can learn more about land ownership and the buying and selling of land at nationalland.com, and please remember to subscribe to this podcast. Thank you and have a great day.